Excited about this panel and about this topic. We have been working for many years at OATS on linking people's digital participation to certain kinds of outcomes that are relevant to aging. And about 10 years ago, we started examining the areas that people were most interested in making a difference. And some of them were fairly obvious. We know that when people go online, they become more socially engaged. And in many cases, they become more connected with their health information and with money and financial management and even, reading and entertainment, creative expression. But one of the things that came up the most when we first started interviewing people about how they wanted to use technology was civic participation. It was really the category of activities that related to people saying, I want to make a difference in the world. I want to improve the world around me. And at OATS and Senior Planet, we've been teaching free technology classes since 2004, starting in a small public housing development in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn. And I've taught a lot of the classes myself and spoken to thousands of the people who come through the programming. And one of the things that people really talk about a lot is that they want to improve the world around them. They want to leave their country and their community and their planet better off than when they got here. And so we realized that technology was a real tool for that people can learn to use the computers and the tablets and the internet and all the different myriad devices and tools that are coming out right now in a way that we had never even been able to envision. We talked about democracy and we talked about creating a kind of a modern society with participation and an active media and people needing to be educated citizens and having everybody voting and all these big ideas that seemed so fresh back in 1700, and today they're just taken for granted. And now with technology, people are being enabled to make more decisions and have a bigger impact, but it's bringing a lot of challenges. It's bringing a lot of different dynamics and things to learn that are a new set of skills and a new set of potential barriers that people have to get through in order to make that difference. So we've been teaching courses on advocacy and leadership for quite a few years now. Everything from helping people learn how to contact and communicate with their public officials to helping people research policy issues and think about what makes a difference in their neighborhoods. We've worked on issues of people from one group of activists in New York City was taking the technology and focusing on fresh groceries. It seemed like a really mundane thing, like, oh, we have to go to the grocery store and get them to get lettuce that's not wilted. But they took the technology and they found out that there were better sources of food and better qualities of food elsewhere, and they were able to bring that information to locals and make a difference. The challenge lately, of course, is that these technologies are bringing with them a lot of uncertainty. The screen is the medium that we're all having to use, and that medium is affecting how we interact with each other. And what we're learning is that requires a new set of skills, a new set of practices that ensure that we can be effective and that we can surface the civic capabilities of older adults. The reality is America cannot thrive without active older people making a difference here. The voices of people over 60 have for centuries been the backbone of our communities here. And so the screens that we've brought into our homes and into all of our communities are creating a sort of both an opportunity and a barrier. And the big phrase that people are talking about, which is of course a hot button issue, is fake news. The notion of it, it's this crazy mixture of news, which we think of as a good thing. We're getting news, we're finding out what's going on in the world, and then it's fake news. So you can't trust it, or how can you trust it? And of course, when we were all a small community of people who knew each other personally, these were not problems. But now that you're getting your news from somebody in Singapore or in Seoul, South Korea, or in France, or Senior Planet, only Senior Planet now, we're in Florida, we're in Palo Alto, California, Northern California, we're in San Antonio, Texas, we're in Denver, Colorado, we're in upstate New York and rural areas. Senior Planet members are sharing news with each other, and they're doing it across all these geographies and all these demographic differences. And the question becomes for people, who do you trust, and how can you trust what you're getting? How do you use the common sense that you know when you talk to a neighbor, or the typical filters that you've developed over the course of all the nuances of culture and language and understanding authority in terms of what's credible, in terms of what's scientifically supported, in terms of what's been researched and authenticated? These are all skills that we all pretty much possess as adults who have critical thinking. And I think older people pride themselves in many cases as having developed an even more sophisticated set of tools around this. But the challenge is, how do we take all of that knowledge and all that capacity and filter it right through this little screen that we're looking at right here, right? How do we understand how do we find ways to communicate that authenticity and that reality to each other, so that when we make a difference, when we're going out to make a difference in our communities, we're doing it with accurate information, we're doing it in an informed manner. We believe that the solution for a lot of these challenges is for older adults to be online even more, and working with each other, working with nonprofits like OATS and with experts like the folks that are coming on the panel later, and really developing those skills, because we need people to be here helping to get our country through this crisis. And addressing the fake news issue is not about some weakness that seniors have that's somehow particular to the older adult population. Older people can learn to use technology. Older people can improve their communities. Older people know the difference between truth and lies. But we do need to learn as a community how to use this medium of the technology and the kind of the choke point, or the kind of the narrow part of the funnel that comes through this screen that we're all using, to be able to interact in a successful and an informed manner. So I'm really excited about being able to introduce this panel. I really want to thank DeAnne and Aaron. I know a whole bunch of other people have worked to bring this together tonight. So I don't want to try to name everybody, because I'm going to forget somebody and people will be mad at me. But I just want to say this is, no topic is more dear to my heart and more important for Senior Planet and for, frankly, the whole world right now, than that we all learn how to judge the information that we're getting, raise the quality of analysis that we're using, and then be more informed and more effective in using this information as we go out to solve the crisis that our country is facing right now. Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much, Tom. We're going to just now show a short clip that NPR featured Senior Planet and OATS. It's a 2-minute clip. And then we'll dive right into our panel discussion. So just give me a moment to share my screen. Oh.
2017 Reddit user of the same name began posting doctored videos.
To technology that they automatically know how to use it and know what to do. And that is false. Kids need guidance in how to use the technology just like anything else.
As we examine the role of media literacy in the lives of our children, we must also reconsider its position in the lives of our parents and grandparents who've witnessed the drastic shift from a print culture to a social media culture, vulnerable to similar threat.
I think that there is something very much to be said about the generational gap of how people have used the internet over time. I remember using Napster as a kid and also understanding what is above board and what is not. For older generations, and this is what we've seen in a lot of the academic literature, there is more of kind of a susceptibility or vulnerability to kind of consuming more of it, and then also over time believing it. And that's not to say that older generations are searching for this content by any means. They are being targeted repeatedly.
Over 65, that population shared more fake information than any other population during the 2016 election. And I think culturally and generationally, they grew up in a time where, if you read it, it was true.
Right. So I'm going to rest my finger where it says open 7 days a week, right on the word open, and I'm going to let go. And now what I've done is...
The dirty word that nobody wants to use is ageism, right? We live in a society where we have a bombardment of negative stereotypes about people who are older, and we have kind of accepted that somehow we're going to segregate our society on the basis of age. Maybe 15 or 20 years ago, seniors and older adults were driving a lot of our community and our civic dialogues. So when you went to a public meeting or a political event, it was 70-year-olds who were often the people that had the experience and the confidence to speak out on policy issues. But today we've had this sort of moment where all of those dialogues have shifted online, and a lot of the tools and environments that people are using are now digital.
The speed at which technology changes puts a challenge on us as a population and as a society to continue to educate people outside of formal education. So the question is, how do we teach? How do we deal with that divide? Because it's there.
I read. I learn how to do things that I'm interested in. If I'm looking for news, I go to look for news stories that I'm interested in. I use it, for my daily life.
Pulling that right handle either to the right and down.
What we need today is to get seniors trained and empowered and included in the digital conversations about our country and our community's futures so that they can bring those perspectives back in.
I think that a lot.
So DeAnne, thank you for watching that clip with us, and we're going to dive into our panel discussion.
Thank you, Erin.
There you are. Thank you.
So before we get started, we just wanted to remind you all about the options that you have to react with the Zoom app or your desktop computer to let us know that you'd like to interact with the panelists. And please be mindful of using the chat room to put your question as well. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. My name is DeAnne Cuellar. I am with Older Adults Technology Services and Senior Planet San Antonio, and I'm Zooming in this evening from San Antonio, Texas. We also have with us tonight Eric Effron, who is the Editorial Director at NewsGuard. We also have Susan Nash. She's the visiting scholar at the Stanford Center on Longevity. Sorry, it's been a long day, guys. And we also have Emily Schonbek. I'm sorry if I said that wrong, Amelia. With researcher reporter at New York Magazine. I'm actually going to unmute our panelists so that they have an opportunity to say their names and their titles the right way.
Okay. Yeah, you did great. I'm Amelia Schonbek, and yeah, again, I'm a journalist at New York Magazine.
I'm Eric Effron, editorial director at NewsGuard.
And I'm Susan Nash. I'm a visiting scholar at Stanford Center on Longevity, where I'm looking at how we can help older people evaluate online information.
Okay. I'm actually going to see if Eric from NewsGuard wants to take the first question, since if you've been attending one of the How to Spot Fake News virtual gatherings at Senior Planet lately, you might have already been shown how to use the NewsGuard tool. But the very first question that we had drafted today was, what tools can people use to help detect fake news?
Yeah, well, thank you. And thanks for having me. And probably I speak for everybody on this call that any little bit of connectivity we could have with our fellow human beings right now is much appreciated. So I'm happy to be here and happy to be in contact with all of you. NewsGuard is a 2-year-old startup. We are, roughly speaking, we're in that sort of fact-checking space. But unlike a lot of fact checkers, we don't look at necessarily individual articles. What we do is we assess the credibility of the site itself writ large. And we do that by rating and writing a review of the site based on 9 very basic journalism criteria. So it's not ideological, it's not political, it's not partisan. But we tell you, does this website run corrections? Does this website tell you who owns them? Does this website tell you who makes their content, where they get their content from? Very, very basic things. But what we've discovered is by doing that, we get a very good read on the likelihood that the content that those sites are publishing is either accurate or inaccurate. And we've done over 4,000 news and information sites now in the US and in the UK, Germany, France, and Italy. And in so doing, we've discovered hundreds and hundreds of what you would consider bad sites. We don't censor those sites, but when you go to those sites, and if you have NewsGuard on your, if you've uploaded our browser extension, you'll see a little shield that tells you whether that website is reliable or not. And if you click on it, you'll get probably more information than you would want about that site. One of our main principles is we don't just tell you, we show you. So if we tell you that a website has been publishing false or misleading news, We will give you examples of those false and misleading stories, and we'll tell you why they're misleading. So it's a tool that I think helps consumers of news and information be a little smarter about the decisions they make about what to consume.
Amelia or Susan, did you want to add anything about the tools that are out there?
A perspective on tools for younger people versus tools for older people. The study that was mentioned in the video, finding that older people were the most likely to forward fake news in the last election. I feel like as an older person myself, I'm coming up on 64. I want to stand up for our generations a little bit, because this is a problem for younger people as well. There was a study out of Stanford in 2016 of college and middle and high school students, finding that over 80% of them had trouble distinguishing between news and sponsored content, and between websites with an agenda and websites that were actually objective. So I just wanted to frame the issue to say that this is a problem for everybody, and then turn it to, what do we know about teaching tech to older people, and what tools are out there specifically for this age group? Again, to pick up on something that Tom said in the video, we as a society, and you all at Senior Planet in particular, have been teaching tech to older people for a long time. We've been teaching people how to use their iPads and how to get online and how to shop on Amazon. And older people can and do learn tech. The studies show, though, that we need a reason to learn something new. We need to understand the purpose of the tech. And so one tool, and I don't want to take too much time, so I have a bunch of ideas of tools, but one main tool is just episodes or presentations, like this, that make older people aware of the fact that news can be altered, that it can look real, and that there's a real need to inform ourselves of what's true and what's not. And I think just getting this message out there, as you all are doing by having this public awareness campaign, will motivate older people to use tools like NewsGuard, as Eric mentioned, or to go to workshops where they can practice evaluating a site, or to go to fact-checking sites and check myths and rumors. So it's kind of a mixture of tools, and I could say more, but I'm sure that there's more to be said by others. I just wanted to frame the issue by saying it's not just us. But people are working to teach younger people, and for older people, we've got to make more of an effort because we're not in classrooms.
So, Eric mentioned that NewsGuard, the company he works for, isn't fact-checking individual articles per se, but is sort of assessing the accuracy of different publications. So I'm somebody who spends a lot of my time fact-checking individual articles, so I'm coming from a little bit of a different sort of entry point into this issue. And I don't necessarily use tools in fact-checking, but have I and my colleagues at New York Magazine build up sort of research methods that we use to assess the accuracy of different sources. So DeAnne, I can talk a little bit about that now, or save that for a later question, since this is a little bit far afield.
Sure. The second question that we have for this evening might support or complement what you were about to say anyway, because in the news clip that Aaron shared, we heard the word divide. And right now we're hearing the different sorts of divides that exist, from digital inclusion, tech inequity, and other gaps that are out there between sectors. And Aaron and I were talking a little bit about that issue and how the divide and inclusion has been getting unpacked in media. And we were wondering what you all thought about the rapid speed of technology changing. And if you all thought that the speed of technology at which it changed, contributes in some way to these different arrays of divides that are out there, and how that impacts specifically fake news, because the way that we traditionally gather information has changed so much.
Well, so, I'm old enough that I can remember when there were three main television networks, all of which pretty much had the same evening news every evening, and a local newspaper. And I grew up in Connecticut. We actually had 3 local newspapers in my area, and a few very important national newspapers. Now there are literally millions of news and information websites. So it's a good news and a bad news situation, right? There isn't just, a small group of companies that now control what we get to see and what we get to hear every night. But the barriers of entry are so low that really anybody with a computer can become a publisher. And there are in that sort of wild, wild west environment, there's no real agreed upon standards. I mean, I went to a graduate school in journalism. I learned about journalism ethics. I learned about anonymous sources. I learned about what off the record means. But for the vast majority of the websites that NewsGuard rates and reviews, these are not even websites that would even say that they're trying to do journalism. They're doing spin, they're doing agitation, they're doing all kinds of things, some of which overlap with news and with journalism, but they're very different. And having to sort that out is virtually impossible without some standards, some tools to help you separate the good from the bad. We're all in this together. I agree that this is not a problem that seniors have uniquely by any means. I remember once very early on when in the internet age, when one of my kids came home from school and was doing research on a topic, and it happened to be about US currency, and was interested in where does the phrase "in God we trust" come from? Why is that on our coins? And so he did a little research and he ended up writing up that the reason we have that is because we're a Christian nation. Well, that's interesting. We happen to be Jewish, and the site that he found was in fact a Christian site that was playing up the Christian aspect of it, but it wasn't a site that you would want to rely on its own for that kind of information. So, I think everybody has some learning to do here. And I'd be lying if I said I think it's easy. But one thing that, and again, I don't want to make this a commercial for NewsGuard, but one thing that we do well is that we do lay out whether or not this site even aspires to be accurate and fair. We're not against opinionated journalism. We just want the people that are doing opinion to tell you it's opinion. And if they're selling you a political ideology, we want them to tell you that. And guess what? Most don't.
Yeah, just to build on that a little bit, I think I would say the proliferation of websites and the increase in the number of people going online is really contributing to this. Older people are the fastest growing users of Facebook. There are more older people going online every day. At the same time, these websites that crop up that, as Eric says, can come from anywhere without regard to standards are not subject to the same kinds of laws and regulations that traditional newspapers have been subject to. So they really can allow content to be posted without the kind of restrictions that, say, the New York Times might have. And I think that's a whole sort of separate analysis. My background's in law, and I won't go into whether the First Amendment affects this or not. But there's a tension out there between this idea that the internet is a place where anybody can say anything, and the restrictions and standards that we come to expect when we're dealing with news. And it's just very hard to tell whether you're dealing with a site that complies with those standards or just a site where anybody is saying anything. And so all of that together, coupled with this vast influx of people of all ages online, is creating this huge problem that has gotten ahead of us and that we're playing catch up on.
Yeah, and I think I would just say, fake news, like fake news is a term that is kind of new, but the sort of larger phenomenon of perhaps untrustworthy information being sort of perpetuated by the media is like as old as journalism itself. Like it's not a new thing that we're dealing with. It's just that the internet kind of has sped everything up and leveled everything. So it's become, it looks different than it looked 100 years ago. I think also, when you think about social media, like the sort of business model of an organization like Facebook is basically the more people spread polarizing information online, the better it is for Facebook's bottom line. So that's just something to think about as well. Like we're sort of feeding into this system that really is encouraging us to spread information that is perhaps outlandish and not true. So it's, that's certainly something to think about as we're trying to figure out why am I seeing so much of this on Facebook? Is it, it's not because, your friends are sort of necessarily like totally into fake news. It's that the social media platforms that we're using want us to sort of spread really outlandish stuff.
Yep, it's true. One of the other questions that we were thinking about was what are the other structures or systems that are in place right now that inform people about fake news in a good way? And we touched a little bit on the tools, but like what are other ways that people can stay informed? And more importantly, what's lacking? Like what are the systemic changes that need to happen to decrease the amount of fake news that's out there? You touched a little bit about Facebook and, data sharing and how it's it's something that responds to the economy. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, so I think that, first of all, it may just be useful to sort of define, like, what are we talking about when we talk about fake news, right? Because the term gets thrown around so much. When I am thinking about this, like as a journalist and somebody who's doing sort of research, I'm thinking about fake news in a sense where it's like dealing with a story that's spreading information that's made up. So, certain politicians will sort of throw around the term fake news often to talk about an article that they perhaps don't like the conclusions of, but that's pretty different. An article that is sort of rigorously sourced and relies on interviews with experts, but that is just not to somebody's liking, is very different than an article that has been fabricated out of nowhere, that's just somebody sort of writing nonsense. And so those are kind of two different things. And the thing to know sort of in either case is that often fake news that is just sort of fabricated out of nowhere will have truly outlandish headlines that are meant to grab your attention and that are meant to sort of have as many people share them as possible. And often those articles will also ask you specifically, like, share this, which is sort of one way that you can maybe know that something might be suspect if they're making an ask at the bottom of a piece to share it. I think just in terms of what the tools that are available or the strategies that are available to finding something that is actually a fabricated piece of news passing itself off as real news. When I'm sort of looking at something, trying to decide, okay, can I trust this? I'll do things like look for spelling errors or strange punctuation in a piece of writing, which are sort of often a telltale sign that it's not totally legitimate. If there are like strings of exclamation points or question marks together, that's like a way that you often know, okay, this is maybe something that I shouldn't trust. I also will go through and see, like, is this article quoting anybody? Almost any reliable news article that you would come across has when it's making a claim, it will quote an expert in a certain field. So if, for instance, it's an article about the coronavirus and it's sort of telling you something about what we know the symptoms are, it would perhaps quote someone from the CDC or the WHO. So you'd say, okay, here are some experts. Fake news articles often don't do that. Or maybe they quote someone who turns out not to be real. So you can do a little bit of your own research and sort of, plug a person's name into Google and see whether that person has been quoted elsewhere, and if there's any evidence that they're a real person on the internet. So those are kind of some, basic strategies that I'll tend to use when I'm trying to assess, like, okay, is this article something that actually holds up or not?
Those are all great. I would add just one to that great list, which is if it's something that you hadn't seen anywhere else, think about that. There's thousands of news or millions of websites, and this is the only one that's reporting this crazy thing, and it's the first time you heard of it. Take 5 seconds or 10 seconds and Google it and see if anybody else or any publication that you've ever heard of is reporting it. And that's just an easy way to just do a reality check for yourself. And by the way, there are scoops, and it may be that this publication is the only one that has this crazy thing, and it's true, but chances are it's not.
Yeah, and I'll just add in another way of looking at this. If you come across a site and it's delivering a piece of information on health news or whatever, it claims that it's the American Academy of Coronavirus Experts or some name that sounds semi-legitimate. It used to be that we would look at the About page, the About tab about on the website, and see if that gave us reason to believe they were legitimate. But things have gotten much worse, right? The fake sites are much better than they used to be. Some of them can even spell now, and so one technique that the Stanford study I mentioned recommends is something called lateral reading, where you open up an entirely new site and then you Google the American Academy of Coronavirus Experts or whatever they claim to be, and you can sometimes find pretty quickly that they're a front for some kind of organization. And even as I say this, I know that sounds like a lot of work, and we don't have a lot of time to do that all the time. But I just want to caution people against thinking that the About Us tab is really something to rely on. And because what I just said is kind of a lot of work, that's where things like NewsGuard come in and other fact-checking sites. So there's a lot of really good sites for coronavirus information and for debunking myths like Snopes and PolitiFact. And there's a science site called MetaFact where you can go and ask a question and get responses from a variety of scientists. And one thing I do when I talk about this is give a list of those sites. So if it would be useful, we could type those in the chat room later if people want to have that information.
Thank you. Well, this kind of takes the subject in like another direction, and I really want to hear what you all three have to say about this. And at Senior Planet, if you've been hanging out with us long enough online, you know that we also care a lot about health and fitness. There's an amazing group of Senior Planet trainers and an entire team that really wants to make sure that we're living like our healthiest life. And I think this question has a lot to do with that. We wanted to ask you all as panelists, how do you think people fall into these patterns of spreading fake news? Because I have people in my life that are from millennials to Generation X and boomers, and I know people of all ages now at this point that share a great amount of fake news, and I worry about how often they do it. And of course, you can't reach out to everybody that you know when you see it, but how do people fall into that pattern?
Well, I think Amelia may have touched on this, but there is an emotional, component to some of this. The reason why fake news gets spread is because it tends to play to our emotions. It plays to our anger, to our fear, and those are all real emotions. And if you're fearful or angry, that's a motivation to like, oh my God, I got to tell everybody about this. I'm pissed. I'm mad. And so one way to kind of be a little bit on the defense and on the lookout for this stuff is you can ask yourself, well, are they trying to play to my emotions here? are they playing to my head or are they kind of playing to some other part of me? And just be wary of that. And before you share news like that, news that seems to be laced with anger or emotion, is see if it's true.
Yeah, and just to pick up on that, there's a study that just came out of the MIT Sloan School of Management last month on the idea that just nudging people to evaluate accuracy may be a way to counteract some of that emotional susceptibility. It's almost like if we can prime people either through public awareness campaigns or through, if Facebook, for example, would put pop-ups up every now and then that say, evaluate the credibility of this headline. The study showed that once people were asked to do that, when they turned to other headlines, they were calmer, they were cooler, they were less susceptible. So I do think that just stopping and thinking and controlling our ability to analyze, which older people are really good at, right? I mean, we're we're more capable of controlling our emotions and more capable of stopping and thinking. So I think we have the tools intellectually to be good evaluators, but I think everybody needs reminders to approach things with a critical eye.
Yeah, and I think too that a lot of social media especially doesn't make it super easy for us to actually like open something up and read it and investigate it. And I know like I spend, for instance, like far too much time on Twitter because a lot of journalists sort of publish their work there. And with Twitter, you're getting a lot of information in short form very fast. And it's similar on Facebook in the news feed. And, actually like stopping to read something sometimes feels like a little bit more work than just like retweeting or resharing it. But actually, yeah, like taking the extra 5 minutes to say like, wait a second, is this totally crazy thing that's kind of like playing into my worst fears about what might be going on right now? Like, is that actually accurate, or is this just something that actually isn't particularly reputable and maybe is totally fabricated? I think that taking the extra time to really say like, okay, what am I dealing with here, before you just sort of like, send it like metaphorically over the fence to your neighbor to look at, I think is super important, and something that I even as somebody who works in the news, have to remind myself, like, before I get upset about this, let me actually see what the details are. Because, even with perfectly like accurate, reputable journalism, headlines don't tell the whole story of a story, right? They're a way of encapsulating a lot of information in just a few words. So I think like really, making a habit of seeing what you're actually dealing with before just like trusting that the headline is actually something that you want to share with people is something that we can all remind ourselves of.
Thank you. Okay, well, we also want to open this up to questions, and Aaron and Ava have been monitoring the different channels. So I am going to also turn this over a little bit to Aaron and Ava to get some questions from the participants today.
So yes, if you do have questions, you can utilize the chat feature. I realize that everyone's muted because we do have over 55 people on this call. So if you can't find the chat feature and we can see your camera, if you want to give us a wave, Ava and I are going to go through right now and see if people have questions. All right, Sandy and Howard, I could see that you're waving your hand. Howard, we're having trouble hearing you with your audio. I'm sorry, can anyone else hear Howard? Howard, if you... I'm sorry. We're having difficulty hearing you. If you can utilize the chat feature, we'll come back to you and see if it's working in just a couple of moments. I do see that somebody.
Pauline has a question. She's been waving her hand. I'm gonna go ahead.
I'm gonna move to Pauline, Sandy, and Howard. We'll come back to you.
Okay, maybe he doesn't have his mic plugged all the way in. That happens to me a lot. Anyway, I had a question to, I do take the time to go to Snopes, and I'd be very happy to get the list of all the other sites that you know that we should fact check written out so we can put it in our databases. That's really helpful. And I noticed that I do not receive a lot of targeted information, and I'm wondering if it's because most of my things that come into me are very not middle of the road or right wing. So I don't know if I'm on a list of anybody to target, but I have rarely seen, I think one thing came into me on an email recently. So that's interesting to note that they're really specifically maybe looking for middle of the roaders or people on the fence, or maybe don't have any kind of political affiliation to target more. But I really appreciate this. This has been really helpful because I do see friends of mine sending things that I know that are obviously not real and are promoting all sorts of things. So thanks very much for all of that.
So I'm not a computer scientist, but I'm going to go out here on a limb on the targeting information question. I think much of the targeting that goes on is really done by the algorithms on a platform like Facebook, for example, because as Amelia indicated, they want to keep your eyeballs on the page. They want to show you ads and get paid for that. So the algorithms are designed in such a way that if you are looking at an article, and it could be on anything, I made the mistake of looking at before the world went crazy, looking at cars because I was thinking it was time to trade in, and I started getting every site I went to, I started getting car ads, and that's an algorithm that is clocking where I've traveled to online and is sending me more information like that. So on Facebook, it's really more what you choose to look at, and that if you're looking at rock and roll bands, then you might get recommendations of new albums. It's not necessarily that they're politically oriented. The algorithm is responding to the input you're putting in. If anybody who has more expertise on how they actually work, feel free to jump in here, but that's an overview.
Thank you, Susan. I see that Phineas has a question, but real quick, I'm going to try with my screen to read that, Sandy. Difference between, can you move the paper over? Between fake news and biased news is Sandy and Howard's question. Did you get that? I'm sorry, I had difficulty reading it. Can you hold it back up again so I can read it again? Difference between fake news and biased news.
I can take a stab at that. Well, first of all, I want to start by saying there really isn't an agreed upon definition of fake news. I mean, the President of the United States says the New York Times is fake news, so it's almost not even a good phrase to use. I mean, we tend at NewsGuard to say false claims instead of fake news, just because it's a little clearer in what we mean. But generally, when you say something is fake or false, you're saying it's not true, it's made up, it's fiction. And there are, in fact, many websites that traffic and whose business model is fake news, literally false news, because what they are doing is they're putting made up stories that are so sensational that they're getting a lot of eyeballs, and then they run ads that are monetized based on how many eyeballs you get to your website. So there is bona fide false news or fake news out there. Bias is a little trickier, right? Bias can be kind of an unconscious thing. Bias could be part of your agenda. You might have an agenda where you're I'll just pick something randomly, but let's say you're a pro-union website or a website of a labor union. You're going to have a bias in favor of organized labor, and everything that you write will be looked at through that prism. What the problem is when there's bias which is not acknowledged or bias that's denied, when in fact the bias is there. And so what that means is you're now getting something which is closer to propaganda than it is to news, because you're being given something in order to be sold something. And that's being done not in an explicit way. It's being done sort of clandestinely or secretly.
Yeah, and I'll just say, to add to that, the line between, you know, where bias ends and where fake news begins can be a little bit hard to pin down. But what I often like to tell people when I'm talking about fact checking is that, you know, if you're sort of reading something about an issue and you're not sure whether the person reporting the story was sort of being accurate and fair, I often encourage people to go and read a few different takes on the same story. So maybe you read a piece in the Guardian newspaper and you're wondering, you know, how did somebody else see this? Maybe you can go look at the Washington Post or the LA Times or even a local paper. And then you can just have a sense, okay, like there are kind of you know, either maybe there are like a really wide range of different reporters' takes on this, or actually maybe everybody's kind of falling within a narrower range and giving maybe different details, but kind of coming to a similar conclusion. So that can be really useful when you're just wondering, like, am I reading something that's really swayed in one direction or another? You know, go see what somebody else thinks. And then, you know, just like when you're talking, it's kind of like talking to people, you know, like you're kind of having a little conversation, one-way conversation with this reporter, and you use your judgment to figure out, okay, are they being fair, or does it seem like they're actually really off in left field?
I see that we have another question from Phineas. I'm going to unmute you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm an old-time lefty. Years ago, I used to buy National Review to find out what the conservative argument was, and it was usually pretty well stated, though I didn't always agree with it. I have a couple of friends that are ardent Trump supporters, one of whom really believes in all the conspiracy theories, and sometimes I look them up and they're kind of debunked. But I mean, one day he told me that Judge Antonin Scalia had been murdered, and I didn't know anything about that. And I looked that up, and I saw an article in the Washington Post that just said that there are questions, you know, because he went to sleep and he was fine, and he woke up and he was dead, and his family didn't want an autopsy, and there's no real answer. So, I mean, I'd just like to know where I can just go for, like, the conservative news that's not fake news. I mean, I don't trust Fox, but I would like to know, you know, all sides of various issues, and I don't know really where to spend my time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. The National Review got a very high score from NewsGuard, and that's because they're very upfront about their conservative orientation. They make arguments that are fact-based. You know, one of the things that we do at NewsGuard is, just because you say something's an opinion doesn't mean that you can have your own facts. You still have to have real facts. And so, you know, we will often cite articles that are labeled as opinion as false claims because the opinion is based on a false claim. So anyway, I'm just saying that I think you've got good taste in terms of the National Review. I think I may have said National Journal. National Review being a good publication, but conspiracy theories are again, I think, the same kind of appeal that that emotion has for us. There's something very appealing and intriguing about conspiracy theories because you kind of feel like you're in on a secret, and well, everybody thinks that this person died naturally, but I believe that this person was assassinated. Or I believe there's a child pedophilia ring run by Hillary Clinton out of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. And the interesting thing about the conspiracy theories, and there's a lot of them around the coronavirus right now, and we can talk about that maybe a little later, is there's usually some tiny little kernel of truth. That they're not just spun out of nothing. They're spun out of a little something and then just spun and spun and spun until you're nowhere near the truth. And one of the things we do at NewsGuard a lot is try to debunk conspiracy theories, not just by saying, well, it's a conspiracy theory, but by saying what the facts are that the conspiracy is supposedly based on and how those aren't real facts, or saying there's really no evidence, that this is a claim that somebody made and that somebody else repeated and then got repeated and repeated. But at the beginning, there's just a claim without any evidence. So what we try to do as much as possible is kind of do a little bit of a forensic analysis of the conspiracy theory to kind of understand where it came from. With COVID-19, the coronavirus, there's a lot of crazy claims about how the coronavirus leaked out of a lab in Wuhan, China, that it was actually part of a bioweapon. And this is a bioweapon that was unleashed on the public. Now, there are some reasons to wonder about whether or not somehow this lab was involved in coronavirus getting out because they were doing some experiments with coronavirus in the lab. But there's zero evidence that this is a bioweapon. So again, there's nuances, and trying to dissect them isn't always easy.
We're going to go for some more questions. I do see that some people are adding things to the chat. I do see a comment that there were several folks in and outside the circle talking about correlation between 5G and the coronavirus. I'm sorry if it's loud over here. There's fireworks going outside of my window right now for some odd reason. I found myself saying it would be to research it, but not sure how to formulate the right decision. So that is a question that someone has about the correlation between 5G and the coronavirus.
Yeah. So 5G is a very popular one out there now. There's a couple of different claims. The main idea is that somehow 5G, the impact of the kind of waves that 5G technology gives out affects our brains and our immunity system somehow and makes us more vulnerable to coronavirus. There's just no evidence that that's true. I mean, it's possible, but there's been no studies showing that. To the extent that other kinds of waves have been studied, the conclusion is that they don't have anywhere near enough power to affect our physiology. So it's a very, very far-fetched conspiracy theory. And it's another example, really, if you have these kind of pre-existing conspiracy theories that then kind of adjust to the news. So the 5G was subject to a lot of misleading reports about the dangers before COVID, but now 5G is being linked to the coronavirus. And we've seen that with other conspiracy theories also. You know, Bill Gates or George Soros are the subject of many, many conspiracy theories. So now they're being blamed for the coronavirus. It's just like a natural progression.
I see, Susan, you have something to add?
Yeah, because for these rumors like the coronavirus and 5G, something like the World Health Organization's Mythbusters page is really good. And there's another site that I'll put in from the AFP, which is an international press site that has another sort of verification hub for coronavirus. I think you find your site that you like, and when you read something ridiculous, you're probably going to be able to find an answer because this stuff spreads so quickly. You can also look at the CDC, but my number one recommendation for something like this would be to go to the WHO site and look at the myths that are floating around and see if you can get the answer that way.
Thank you. See some more. Pauline, not really a question, but she was saying, just piggybacking off what you were saying, Eric, that the biotech idea came from Fox, is what she wrote in the chat. And then
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we are actually in the process of reviewing our write-up on Fox News because there has been some questionable stuff there about the virus, but we haven't published that yet. But I'm not sure about whether that it's true that the bioweapon claim came from there. I know Fox hosts have talked about the leak out of the Wuhan lab, but again, that can be distinguished from the bioweapon. So I'm just not sure about that. But it brings up another question, which somebody sent me privately, which is, does NewsGuard rate cable channels? So I just wanted to quickly answer that, which is we rate websites. So we have rated the website of the major cable channels, cable news channels, Fox, MSNBC, and CNN. But we don't rate the cable broadcasts themselves.
Okay, great. And then we have, Jean would like the panelists to talk a little bit and touch base about fake news and how it will affect the national election in December. So we could.
Well, I mean, looking at what happened in 2016, fake news, I mean, was just a huge rampant problem. And so it seems very likely that it will and also is already affecting the type of information that we're reading about the 2020 election, and certainly the type of information that we were reading about the Democratic primary. So while I can't predict exactly what's going to happen, I think it's safe to say that, fake news sort of remains with us and is kind of getting ever smarter, and will certainly continue to be, very much around as we sort of spend time on social media reading about the sort of day-to-day election happenings.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ways that fake news is spread around, or was spread around in the last election, it was part of a Russian misinformation campaign. And I think it was just today or yesterday, I don't know, the days all kind of flow together, but the Senate Intelligence Committee released, I think its last report, and, basically saying we're just going to have more of the same this time. So, at a minimum, we know that there are going to be, players with bad motivations who are spreading fake news or news that's meant to be divisive and polarizing. So some people are saying that, 2016 was just a dress rehearsal, and that 2020 is going to be even crazier as far as that's concerned. And I think just, as you in thinking about that, what is it going to look going forward? I think really one of the, the people who proliferate fake news do continue to sort of change up their tactics. Like Susan said a while ago, some of these sites, fake news sites, are even getting better at spelling now, which is true. And so I think just continuing to sort of check in, and even doing some sort of ongoing, maybe once a month or every couple of months, what's going on with fake news? Are there any new ways that people are recommending I sort of look into this, or new tactics that sites are using? I think just kind of making it a habit for all of us to check in on what the latest developments are over the next few months leading up to the election is probably really good, just practice to sort of increase all of our media literacy and keep on top of the different ways that things are sort of unfolding.
Amelia, you made me think of something, and I'm, feel free to deny this question completely. But one of the questions that I get from people that I know that live all over the country is they ask me, well, how come we just don't shut down certain social media platforms? Why don't we just turn off that person that speaks on the news? Why don't we just, there's just this broad question of why aren't people just shut down from being able to make media? And I think that's a complicated thing. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a big question. I think, it is, somebody at some point mentioned that the internet has very low barrier to entry. So it's very easy to begin publishing information on the internet through, something like a blog, or even just a Twitter feed. I think now is a really sort of frictionless way to start spreading information. So I think logistically, there are, we live in a country that really values everybody's ability to say what they want whenever they want. And I think like how to even begin sort of regulating who's allowed to say what when is just a fairly overwhelming question that hopefully we can engage in as the society. Like, do we want to allow the just like unmitigated spread of falsehood online? But we haven't done a very good job yet of figuring out how to have that conversation without shutting valid voices down in the process.
Yeah, and just at its most basic, to go back to first principles, if a state were to pass a law that said, there shall be no fake news on any platforms, that would violate the First Amendment, right? I mean, we know we can't restrict speech in a way that is so vague and hard to enforce. So it's a very incremental approach. There are restrictions, for example, on platforms putting up sex trafficking information, and when you can show that a certain kind of news is harmful and there's no possible good reason for it, then you can maybe regulate it. But as Amelia says, just trying to decide what speech is permitted and what is not is really a thicket. And even if it were possible to find all the fake news, it would be very hard to regulate it that way, which is why all these other efforts, like trying to get the platforms to be more transparent in what they're putting up, what's a political ad and what's not, and teaching people how to defend for themselves are good ways to try to combat it. Defend for themselves by becoming more media literate. Yeah.
Thank you. I do see some more questions in the chat. Another question is, what do you think of news aggregator? Sorry, I can't speak. Like Google News to put news about topics from different sources. How can I tell that Google is not biased even through the present different news sources?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, for the most part, when the big brands like Google and Apple News, I think Twitter has a news feed, which is also an aggregated feed, although nobody seems to know that, but it's there somewhere. For the most part, they're trying to pick credible sources, and they're trying to pick a cross section of sources. And they also have, they try their best to weed out stuff that might be really bad. But I think you have to keep your skepticism, close to the surface at any time you consume information. But for the most part, those the aggregated news sites are trying to pick sites that are credible. We do have NewsGuard has an arrangement with Microsoft for their mobile web browser, which is called Bing. No, what's it called? Edge. And if you use Edge, then when you surf the internet, you'll see at the URL, the address at the top of the site, you'll see the NewsGuard shield right there, and you can click on it. And we're working with some other big tech companies to integrate our content that way also.
Okay. We do have another question. Pauline, when online, check the URL. I don't know if this is a question from Pauline. Looks more like a statement, but she wanted to add, when online, check the URL source to see if that it could be strange. You need to tell people how to do that in an email.
Yeah, I think I know what Pauline is getting at. There are, I think the best example, I'm just trying to find it. If you remember, there was that claim that the Pope had endorsed Donald Trump in the last election, also a claim that he'd endorsed Hillary Clinton. But the website the web name of the website that had that claim originally was called endingthefed.com. And that was a clue that that website was not a legitimate place where the Pope's endorsement would show up, right? So if you look at the name of the website, there can sometimes be a funky URL, a funky name that gives you a clue that what you're looking at is wrong. Another maybe simpler example is that abc.com is the main site for the ABC network and news. But there are sometimes news sites that come out that say abc.com.co or dot something else. So when you just see these strange looking names in the URL, in the name of the website itself, that can be a clue that that's not a legitimate or reliable source.
Yeah, and we're seeing that a lot also with the coronavirus. And in fact, maybe it's nice that we haven't had to talk about the coronavirus very much during this call, but I just would like to say a couple of things about that. When NewsGuard started, we really were focused very much on political news. It was a time when, fake news was in the news. And we quickly discovered that there's actually more and arguably more dangerous fake health news out there than even political news. And more dangerous because, it really could affect, your health, bogus cures and dangerous remedies. And we have now started a feature on our website on newsguardtech.com where we list websites that we have found that are publishing bad coronavirus information. And 80% of those were already publishing bad health information before the coronavirus. So they again, it's the same players. And a lot of them, their motivation is really financial. They're selling stuff, they're selling vitamin C tablets. They're selling something called colloidal silver, a liquid form of silver, which some people claim can cure coronavirus, and the FDA says can make your skin turn blue and maybe kill you. So, there's a lot of bad health information. And one of my colleagues, I think, is sending around to this group sort of an example of one of our nutrition labels in the health vertical, which kind of is it's called Natural News. It's a part of a huge network of sites that the name sounds very benign, but they peddle very questionable and dangerous health remedies. And I wish I could say that we found all of the bad coronavirus sites, but we're literally adding several a day to this tracker that we started on our website. So last time I checked, there was like 178. And if I check now, it's probably 183. So that's what we're all up against.
Okay, thank you. I know Melissa Golden is on the line that also works for NewsGuard as well. Melissa,
right.
I'll unmute you.
Hi.
Hey, Melissa.
Hi, Eric. Was there a specific question, or I wasn't sure?
Yeah. So, Melissa, I know that you wanted to share some reviews about the website from NewsGuard. I just want to unmute you just to talk a little bit about that. I don't know if someone asked about the nature of the network that includes over 200 sites that promote both medical and non-medical conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I personally didn't work on that review, so I don't know about it in detail. But that's just one example of many sites that share conspiracy theories. That one specifically shares a lot about medical conspiracy theories, but we've also found ones that share political conspiracy theories and ones that are just completely outlandish. One that I did is called whatdoesitmean.com. Yahoo News reported that it started a conspiracy theory about Seth Rich, a former Democratic National Committee staffer who was murdered a couple years ago. And that one has a lot of really outlandish claims that don't even really seem to be in proper English. So that Natural News is one example of some really outlandish claims that you can see on these sites.
Thank you, Melissa. We're getting more questions in, and now someone's asking about the procedure that you actually go through to use NewsGuard and download NewsGuard. I don't know, Eric or Melissa, you would like. Eric, would you like?
Yeah, well, if you go to our website, www.newsguardtech.com, you'll see pretty prominently on the site there's an opportunity to download a web browser, or I'm sorry, a plugin. And during the coronavirus period, we're making that available for free. We had been charging for it. And by downloading that, it works with all the major web browsers. And when you are searching the web and you get a list of results, when you do a Google search, alongside the results, you'll see the NewsGuard Shield, which if you click on, you can get our write-ups. So if you've never done a download of a plugin, it's not complicated. I figured it out, so that proves it's not complicated. And then it'll just appear it'll be integrated basically into your web searches once you download it and you enable it. There's a couple of prompts that ask you your permission, et cetera, but it takes around 5 minutes.
Thank you. I do want to take a break for the chat and see if there's anyone that can't utilize the chat and if they have a question. I know some people that are on the phone. So first I'm going to check for people to do verbal some waves and see if they have a question that way. But for some people that are on the phone, we will unmute for a brief second. If it gets to be too loud, we will mute everyone again. But first I'm going to start off. If everyone that's sharing their screen, they have a question, please give me a wave. Anyone else? Okay, so I see Sandy and Howard. I'm gonna try to read, give me a second. I'm gonna see if I could read your question.
She can use the chat, she says.
Can't use the chat. We're going to go ahead and unmute everyone. Ava, if you can do that. Please, if you don't have a question, please mute your mic. If it gets to be too loud, we will put everyone back on mute.
We know that Blacks are more likely to have diabetes, lung disease, and
Does anyone have a question?
high blood pressure.
Howard, I see that your hand is up, but I don't know if I can hear you.
That I actually have. And so I represent that legacy of growing up.
Howard, your audio doesn't seem to be working. Is there anyone else that has a question that's over the phone?
Jelani?
Should be able to unmute.
Yeah. I mean, this is very difficult. All right. I mean, it's very difficult. It's difficult to talk about this in a detached and analytical way. Because.
All right. Hi, this is Shayla. I don't know how to express what it is that I tried to say, but with something that I think Eric responded to, if something is not fact-based, it was the way that you phrased it, that if something is not true, you're kind of proving it with a negative statement, that there is no factual claim for that to be true. So approaching it a different way, how do you, looking at it, if there is nothing, I don't know what I'm trying to say. How do you ask the question to find out what facts that you have to check to find out if something is true or not?
Yeah, I think I understand your question.
Okay.
Sometimes you can just prove something is true or false. Sometimes you can't. All you can say is, well, there's no evidence that it's true, because it's very hard to prove a negative, right? So, can we prove that Antonin Scalia wasn't assassinated? I don't think so, but we can quote the police report. We can say what his family said. We can say what was reported at the time. I don't know if there was an autopsy, but if there was, we could quote the autopsy. So we have all this evidence that suggests that he wasn't assassinated, but we was. And one of the things that we do in NewsGuard is, obviously it's better if you can prove something is, somebody says X and you can prove it's Y. But if somebody says X and there's no caveats and there's no context and it's just stated as an absolute and there's no evidence for it, then that is something that we would call a cite out for. Because if you're going to make a claim, then you should back it up with something, not just somebody else made the claim and I'm repeating it.
And I think too that when you're reading a story, like good news stories will tell you how a journalist knows something, like where they got their information from. Good news stories really, they show their work. And so that means that you can sort of like trace that work yourself. If somebody is telling you something but not telling you how they know, then that's a little bit of a flag. So ideally, when you're presented with some information, it will give you the tools that you need to say, okay, is this actually verifiable?
That's helpful. Thank you.
So Debbie did ask, and thank you, Melissa, for answering in the chat, just so everyone knows that she was asking about the extension and how much it would cost and is it free to download. Melissa then did let her know, and the group know, that it is free until July 1st due to the COVID-19 crisis. It's normally $2.95 per month. Oh, so normally costs $2.95 per month, yes.
Right.
We have some people that are unmuted. Is there anyone else that has a question that wants to give me a wave? Sandy and Howard, I know we're having difficulty getting to you. You can't access the chat feature. We're also having difficulty hearing you. If you could write it down and I'll try to read your question through the camera again, that would be helpful. But I know Darlene, I believe you had a question. Ava, can you unmute Darlene? I'm having trouble.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ava. Oh, there you are, Darlene.
Yeah.
Talking to me?
Yes, you were waving.
Oh, no, sorry. It was just moving around. Sorry. But maybe Howard should try his speaker volume on his computer. There is a thing that looks like, voice activation, something like that. Maybe that would help him.
Yes, there is a button to listen with computer audio if you're on a laptop. Any other questions? You want to give me a wave or sign, a hand wave, chat? For those of you that are muted and can't access the chat, we'll try unmuting everyone one more time. Again, if it gets to be too loud, we'll mute everyone again. But Ava, can you go ahead and unmute everyone?
Yeah.
If you're off the road,
all right. Does anyone have a question while you're unmuted? If you don't have a question, if you could please mute yourself.
I have another question.
Oh, I hear someone.
Shayla again. How do you listen to both sides and still come away with information on both sides without feeling like you're losing your point of view? And I know that sounds one-sided. So let's say I have a particular point of view or side that I'm on. How can I feel like I'm safely listening to both sides of an argument or position and be comfortable? I don't know if that's the right word either. How does one listen to get all the information they need to filter it? What's the best way to get all the information you need so you can really obtain an informed point of view? It's not more like here. Yeah.
I think that's a really good question. I think that, I have a few thoughts about this. I think that reading like widely and deeply into all of the things that you're curious about is really the best and like simplest answer to your question, actually. Just that like the more curious you are and the more information you seek out, the better able you will be to, it's almost like developing like a sense, like as you come across more information and really use like your own intellect to sort of suss out what feels right and what is accurate, the better informed you'll be. So I think that also, I really do think that this is a little bit like you're using the same skills that you're using having a conversation with your friends. I mean, I often think this way when I'm fact checking something, that, when I'm having a conversation with anybody, I'm always sort of listening to what they say. And I'm sort of like, oh, like, does this stand up, like based on everything that I know. So I think that you're really using the same skills when it's news. It just looks different because you're reading rather than talking. And we know like humans have something called confirmation bias, which is just that like we kind of have this built-in desire to confirm the things that we already think. So I think also just being aware of that and really holding yourself accountable to ask questions and say like, really, am I just like, do I just want to like trust this because it's telling me what I already know? Or am I really going to be open-minded and like ask questions about this? Like, I think it's those sort of basic skills that we all use in our day-to-day that are important to me.
And I'm just going to add to that. I mean, we started the premise of this panel is that older people have been found to be more susceptible to fake news. And I just want to emphasize that we also bring some wisdom and life experience to it, right? We bring some advantage to evaluating what people say because we've been on the planet longer. So I think once you get away from being intimidated by the technology and just, as Amelia says, treat it like you would the rest of your life, that we should think of ourselves as completely able to evaluate and make decisions because we've been doing it for a long time before there was an internet. So I would just like to push for that frame of thinking about it.
Some of us are entrenched in our point of views. So I'm too in terms of just kind of widening what I had within my own circle of beliefs to be more informed and to do that open-mindedly.
Yep. I was also going to say, Cuellar, someone who has learned a lot about media literacy through being open to learning from people that spend their life's work on media literacy as an issue, is that I can have, a political position on several things that I care deeply about. And the more that I allow myself to be open to and curious to the other points of view, like Amelia pointed out, just a minute ago, has really showed me that sometimes there's more than one truth to a situation. And then that actually has opened up a whole nother world of information to me that's, really helped me, I think, make, informed decisions about things in my life that I didn't before I had that skill set. So it's a practice. That's why I sometimes tell people, like, just like we practice meditation, that's like completely different from what we're talking about right now. But you know how we develop routines in our life. I mean, I've learned that practicing good media literacy is something I need to choose to work on.
Thank you. Yeah.
So Aaron is, we lost our host, Aaron, but Ava is still here, and so is Melissa. And I'm going to do my best to answer some of these questions.
So there is a question from Mike, and he joins late, but he said if there any recommended liberal, conservative, and moderate sites that are recommended to obtain a more complete and rounded view on the facts?
So yeah, that's a good question. I think in my work as a fact checker, I do a lot of compiling of my own sort of lists of what I call just like solid sources. So I can share those after the panel. I think that it takes a little bit of refining, but yeah, I think that every journalist and every sort of person who is in and around the media does do their own sort of work to compile lists of trustworthy sources, and I'd be happy to share mine.
And then,
Can someone help me read Sandy and Howard's screen?
Yes.
Okay.
I see my name. Can you move the page a little bit further away from the camera? Where is the send button for chat questions? Oh, okay. I'm gonna try to say, so in
enter, hit enter. Just press enter, yeah. I unmute you, Susan and Howard. Try it if you can talk.
Yeah, the audio doesn't work. But if you go to the middle, you'll see the chat button, and then you just need to type, and then you just need to hit the enter key, and it should pop up. Okay, hopefully that'll work.
I think DeAnne has a question.
Yeah.
In the meantime.
Sorry, I'm just going to depart.
Oh, okay, Darlene, don't worry.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Just FYI, someone told me in a last Zoom meeting that if everyone was muted and they wanted to unmute themselves, to just press the space bar. And I don't know if that works in all settings, but it did in the session that I was in. So everyone could remain muted, and an individual could just press the space bar for the time that they have a question to ask, and then release it and they are muted again. Is that true in your experience?
Yes, if you push mute, then you can use your space bar.
Yeah.
Like a walkie-talkie.
Yeah. Okay.
So does anybody else has a question?
I'm sorry, Susan, you did say you were going to provide some resources of the various websites for or tools for vetting websites.
Yeah, I put them in the chat box, but I think the simplest thing would be for me to send the list to Senior Planet, and you all can distribute it. Does that work, DeAnne? Or
that would be fine.
Yeah, I put it in. I put it in, and then I put in some more after we switched over to talking about the coronavirus. So I'll just send an email to DeAnne and put them all together.
Okay, so I have a question that it was sent privately, but it's from Jane. So she wants Eric to distinguish the difference between NewsGuard from the other fact-checking sites, and that has been mentioned.
Yeah, so I mentioned this at the very beginning, which is most fact-checking sites, and God bless them, because we cite them all the time, will fact-check individual articles and will tell you whether that article is true or false, or whether the claim by a politician is true or false. We assess the credibility of the website writ large, And we do it by looking at 9 different factors that are non-ideological, not political. And it ranges from, does the site have a history of publishing false content? Does it run corrections? Does it separate news and opinion? Does it avoid deceptive headlines? Does it tell you who the owner is? Does it tell you who the top editors are? Does it tell you who the content creators are? Does it distinguish between advertising and editorial content? Sort of basic things. And we give then a score based on how all these things add up. And if they get over 60, they're green, which means they're generally credible. And if they get under 60, it's red, which means they're generally not credible. Mm-hmm. And if you're a 0, that's pretty bad. And if you're 100, that's great. And there's a lot of sites that fall in between. So, it's still left to consumers to make their own judgments about these things. But we give a kind of broad guidepost to whether or not the site is generally transparent and credible.
Oh, it looks like we're going Aaron back.
Hi, everyone. I lost everyone for a little while. My internet doesn't seem to be cooperating.
Then
Ava, we're still going through questions?
yes, so Eric just finished answering one of them. Hey guys, so does anybody else has a question from the ones that I don't see their videos, meaning audio? I'm gonna proceed and unmute them all again. And same thing, if you don't have a question, just please mute yourself. So let's try it again, okay?
What do you mean by that? We just got
Or you can also write it on the chat. Looks like everybody's quiet now.
Oh, I believe we have another question.
Okay. Yes.
Eric, oh, go ahead.
Okay, so it says, Eric, can you publish here the list of criteria for deeming on the site credible you just mentioned? So
yeah, so my colleague Melissa earlier sent an example of the nutrition label. And as part of that nutrition label, you can look at our criteria checklist, and that has all the criteria with an explanation as to what they are. And also on our website, we list them too, which is at www.newsguardtech.com. You're welcome.
Do we have any questions over the phone? In just a moment, I'm also going to put a survey into the chat feature. I understand that some people don't have access to the chat feature, and that's okay. This survey is from Senior Planet. I'm just asking that you please do it if you can. It's going to help us with our virtual programming. We started submitting the survey when we started doing our programs on Zoom, and your feedback is very appreciated and very important. So in just a moment, I will put that survey into the chat feature. I believe we have another question, Ava. I'm going to look for that survey.
Yeah. Okay, so it says on Facebook, if you think someone is posting false news, is it helpful to report Facebook or the administrator of the page for false news or not?
Well, I guess the short answer is it doesn't hurt, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I mean, not to be smug about it, but I mean, Facebook has, billions of posts every day that they cannot possibly keep track of. And try as they might to police fake news, they never really do it that well. We just published a feature on our website of 15 major Facebook pages that are spreading fake coronavirus news. None of them had been flagged by Facebook. None of them had been fact-checked. So Facebook does have procedures and I guess it can hurt if you see something that's bad to whatever reporting mechanism they have.
I completely agree with Eric. I think it might be fair to say that much of what happens in Facebook is a black box. But the one thing where it would be useful is if there's some sort of fake posting that could lead to immediate harm. I mean, that's the kind of thing they have fact checkers for. So hopefully you'll never see that, but that sometimes can be effective.
Okay, I don't see any more other questions in the chat. I don't see anyone waving. I
think Cuellar has another question. I'm gonna go ahead and mute.
I put it in the chat. I think this is for Susan. It says, where do I find the about that in each of the browser? And remind me again what kind of information that provides.
Oh, I'm sorry if I made it so, if I wasn't clear about that. I was talking about a website, for example. There's a website called minimumwage.com, for example. And if you, many websites will have a tab that says about us. It just depends on how each site is built. But in that particular one, if you read about it, it sounds like it's a think tank evaluating employment policy, but in fact, it has a lot of words about how it's a nonprofit and it does research and all sorts of things that sound legitimate. But if you Google the site, then you find out that it's actually an industry PR firm. So it just depends on the site. But I've attended a lot of these sessions on media literacy, and often there will be a recommendation if you're looking at a website to check the About Us tab if the website has it. And I was just cautioning people to not always believe that, because a website that wants to present itself as legitimate is going to do a decent job on the About Us page as well. So that's all I meant by that.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, go right ahead. I see your hand is raised, Jan. Go ahead.
So if you're wanting to check, a particular article, how many of these fact-checking sites is it necessary to look at to feel like you've, accurately checked the article?
Well, I can tell you what the standard is for magazine fact checkers. We usually look at 3 different sources when we're trying to verify something. So that's sort of one standard. I think that a good idea would be look at 2. And if they're really different, then that's probably a good sign that looking at a 3rd just to see where it comes down would be a good idea. If you look at 2 fact-checking sites that are reputable and they're lining up, then that's probably a good indication that you can sort of rest there. But if you're getting really, really different information, I'd say a tiebreaker is a good idea.
Thank you.
I did see that someone had a question about this session being recorded and being viewable for a later date. Yes, you can view this discussion on our Senior Planet YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and you type in Senior Planet and you go to our YouTube channel, you will see that the discussion will be there. It will be edited tomorrow. I think there's just going to be a long version that is up there, but it will be condensed the next day. Any other questions over the phone? Eric, Amelia, Susan, are there anything, topics or any points that you wanted to bring up before we come closer to an end?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, thanks everybody for listening. I thought the questions were great. So
yeah, I really enjoyed it, and they were great questions, and it was a great panel, and I really appreciate everything you guys do in your organization to help with the cause. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for coming. I'm just going to give just another minute to see if there's someone trying to ask a question. I know that I see someone.
I think Irene has a question.
I do. Thank you. I'm still interested in the list of different websites we can go to check about the news. And I think you said that it would be given to Senior Planet. Would they then put it on their website when they're giving information about the talk tonight?
Irene, we will not have it on our Senior Planet website, seniorplanet.org. We do have a YouTube channel. So you have to go to YouTube's website. And then if you type in the search bar, Senior Planet, you will see that we have a Senior Planet channel on that website.
I think what Irene actually was talking about, Susan was talking about circulating a list of resources, perhaps by email. I think that's maybe what you were referring to.
Yes.
You know, if it's simpler, I'm easy to find. I don't mind putting my email in the chat box, and if you want the list.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
Because I'm findable. So I'll just put this in there, and if you just send me an email that says please send fact-checking list, I'll do that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay.
All right, we're just going to give another minute, see if someone else is. For the 212 number, just because you're on a phone, I'm going to unmute you just to see if you have a question. If not, that's completely fine. Just want to give you an opportunity to ask since you are on a phone. Phone number 212-260, do you have a question? If not, that's okay. I'll move on to another person. No? Okay. Just going to see if there is someone else that's on a phone that might have a question that doesn't have access to the chat feature. Don't see. Okay. Well, doesn't seem like we have more questions at this moment. I think this was a very informative and excellent panel. Thank you to all of our panelists, and thank you for DeAnne for being our moderator for the discussion. I appreciate you all coming and talking about this topic that we are very interested in at this current time and have been interested in a while. Just to have these conversations, I believe, is very important to really hear about the different tools that people are utilizing and hear different perspectives. And just to have these open conversations, I think, is really important to have. And I'm very glad that we were able to have this program tonight and share it with our Senior Planet community and people that are in different geographies, not just New York. We open this up to other locations. And I can see even from the chat, people are saying that they're coming even from different areas where we don't have Senior Planet locations, which I believe is really great that we're opening these conversations up, and we're opening them up not just from the Senior Planet community where we have locations, but opening it to such a larger scale and making sure that these conversations are happening throughout the country because they are so important. So I want to thank you, Susan, Amelia, and Eric, for joining us tonight and sharing all the plethora of great information that you have and to talk about your points of views and your experience on this topic. And thank you so much, DeAnne, for moderating and asking these hard-hitting questions that a lot of people want to know information about. So I just want to, before we leave, just give an opportunity for DeAnne, Eric, Amelia, and Susan if they have some last-minute comments before we end today's program. But thank you all again, and thank you to the members for joining us as well.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to be here.
Yeah, I agree. I enjoyed it. I'm glad we're talking about this.
Thanks again. Bye-bye. Good night.
DeAnne, thank you. All right. So I'm going to end today's today's program. For those of you that want to know how to leave a meeting, at the bottom right of your screen, there should be written in red, it says leave meeting. And if you click on that, that will leave the meeting. I'll give a few moments for people to have the opportunity to find the feature. And when I end the meeting, since I'm the host, it will kick everyone out and it will conclude. But thank you all again for coming and joining us today.